Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another live guest interview within Mindful Journey. If this is your first time joining us, we're so happy to have you here today. If you've been with us for a number of these conversations, as always, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat function, and then we'll get to them on the back end of the conversation and sometimes in real time. All of these discussions are meant to really dive deep beneath the surface to learn from guests just like Joe. We've had a wide array of guests from varying industries, from those immersed in the world of business to law enforcement to military to medicine, education, etc. And really, we're just wanting to normalize and humanize this shared experience of life that we're all on. Talk about the adversities that inevitably we all face, no matter what we've accomplished, where we've been, what we've done. So I know with certainty that our guest today, Chief Joe Fox, is undoubtedly going to add value to us, inspire us. Candidly, he and I have not met in person at this juncture. Look forward to the time when we get to do so, but came across his work a few months ago and just really appreciate, respect, and found great value in personally the message that he's bringing to the world and the vulnerability. So not going to dive too deeply into his resume, but just a few things to highlight. He is retired from the NYPD after 37 years of service, rose to the rank of three-star chief, ultimately overseeing and being the chief of the Transit Bureau, travels throughout the United States now as an executive coach, life coach, a leadership trainer, and keynote speaker. And again, with all that being said, grateful for him being here. Joe, thank you. And thank you all for being here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for connecting with me. And a concept I live by is there's no such thing as strangers in life. There's just friends I've yet to meet. So great to become friends with you.
Likewise. Yeah, I love that. Well, Joe, for those listening in who, I'm trust maybe some of your connections may be with us today. So some might be familiar with you, your work, and your background, but those who've never met Joe Fox, would you mind giving us a brief overview of your career in the NYPD, throughout from start to finish, and then kind of a high-level overview of what it is that you're doing today?
I'll touch on the career because if I do the whole thing, 37 years could take the whole podcast.
Yeah.
But basically, I was very fortunate, and I know luck comes with hard work, so I get that. But success doesn't always come with luck, and I guess I had both. 37 years, I started in Brooklyn South. I wanted to become a cop because my father was. It was an easy journey for me. Life, most people struggle with what they're going to do. With me, I knew when I was 8 years old, and everybody in the neighborhood came to him for advice for anything in the world. A man with an 8th grade education. Something clicked there that, he knows what to do and he knows how to help people. And it seemed like something I wanted to do. So off I went, 1981, I signed on, I worked in Brooklyn, bounced around through my, promotions. Sometimes when you say bounced around in a career, it's not a good thing. Moved around with promotions through the ranks: sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy inspector, inspector, full inspector. It was really, I became a commanding officer of the 7-1 precinct. That was my first commanding officer spot. And that was pretty special to me because when I was watching my father make a world of difference on Avenue L, he was a cop in Crown Heights in the 7-1 precinct. So I became the commanding officer of the place he was a cop in. And that was like an amazing experience. I'm still on Facebook and in, friends in life with people from there, from the community and cops. I wound up getting promoted a few times. Howard Safer, who God bless him, just passed about a year now. And he saw something in me. And probably the take of maybe some of my peers promoted me way too many times. But it was an exciting ride, and he just kept giving me more responsibilities. And then I became chief of transit, which is a bureau chief, 3-star spot in 2011. And I did that for the last 7 years. I'm proud of my stay in Brooklyn South because there I have a record for longevity that will never be in any history book. But I am the longest sitting borough commander, not only there, but throughout the NYPD with my 11 and a half years.
Wow.
Means nothing, but it's important to me. And
Yeah.
from that, you mentioned me doing the leadership training in places. I'm doing something with Lincoln Center in a couple of weeks, and Hope Mills, North Carolina, with Chief Dollinger and his team down in October. It's interesting because if you hear my leadership sessions, and it sounds like nothing that you would learn as a police officer or as a police manager, because what I've
Mm,
learned about policing was life. And
mm,
I guess I just gotta fast forward lesson on life. And you mentioned in the intro, kind of like why we're here, this
mhm,
experience. I learned a lot about why we're here. And those lessons keep coming to me. And I jumped into
mm,
social media in 2018. Before 2018, I was one of those guys or gals that said, if I'm not in touch with somebody in my life now, I don't need to be on Facebook and find them 20 years later. And I believe that made sense. I can't tell you how wrong I am. I was.
mm,
And to those who believe that, give it a try. Because these people who have not been in my life for 10, 20 years, who are now, I cherish. And I've
mm,
my world has opened up even more. And if you look at the theme of what I put out, it's quite simple. I just try to put things out that make the world look a little more positive and a better place than too many of us think it is.
mm.
And every single thing, and every now and then, Adam, I'll scroll through what I put up last.
Yeah.
Like today, I put up, I put up a picture of Officer Arthur, who works in the
Mhm,
Bronx. I took that picture a few days, like last week, but I'll look
mhm,
through and think, okay, when was the last sunset photo? When was the last picture of my grandkids? When was the last poem? When was the last time I took a picture standing with a cop? And I try
mm,
to space them out because I guess the message is it's all about humanity.
mm,
Whether it's a poem, a picture of a flower, a picture of a sunset, or a young man, like Officer Arthur, who's making the world a better place. So that's social media. It takes time.
yep.
Many mornings I wake up and say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. And an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I haven't got off my phone yet because I'm posting something, I'm responding to comments, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Uh,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I do now.
That's awesome, Chief. Thank you for
That's how
first
we
of all
met.
just yeah, and I was just going to say that. I'm so glad that you brought that up because there is and can be a lot of negativity associated with social media, right? Where the comparison game, you look at your neighbors, you look at your peers and say they've got a better life, a better husband, a better wife, a better boyfriend, a better girlfriend, a better home. So there can be some toxicity that comes from it. But I love hearing what you're saying. Like, double down on the good that can be had from it. And you're spot on. We literally, our paths would have never crossed had it not been for social media. So thanks for bringing that to us and reminding us of that. I do have a question, and there's so much I want to unpack from what you just shared, but in particular, you said something that deeply resonated with me about trying to bring positivity like from humanity that we often look and find negative, but there's so much good out there. My question to you is how, as someone who was inevitably exposed to tough times, right? What could be perceived as the worst in humanity, operating in law enforcement, where you're having to show up to, violent crime incidents, fatal accidents, etc. How were you able in that world, and then how have you continued to be able to operate with positivity in spite of the negativity that you'd been exposed to?
That's a loaded question and a great question. And it's been a long journey. First, um, the simple answer is we have to be able to dull our feelings. When I say we, depending on the individual. Sometimes people need to dull their feelings so they can do. A detective in the crime scene unit, if they get overwhelmed by the gruesome, horrible pain that they're seeing every single day, then they can't do it. They can't process crime scenes. So when you hear like sometimes cops are callous, there's that skin that we have to develop. I see a therapist. I started seeing a therapist in 2013. And it wasn't until, and we'll get into this when we get into PTSD and trauma, but it wasn't until I retired, months, maybe a year after, that we both noticed that I'm starting to feel, like really feel.
Mm,
When I read the news, I look at news apps here and I look at the title. And if it says 6-year-old killed by his mother, swipe. I mean, I don't care less about the pain of that family, but I know what the story is. So I don't expose myself to it.
mm,
Because when I was on a job, you had to expose yourself to it. And as a chief, of course, I wasn't the first on the scene, but I saw a lot. So all the reports, all the updates. So it's kind of, I'm very fortunate. It's an ongoing process to answer your question. It takes work. What I figured out with Jackie, my therapist, this was like a eureka moment about 5 years ago, is that the way my default in pain is service.
mm,
So when a woman whose name I won't mention was brutally beaten during a rape, when I was a rookie cop with my partner, Mike Collins, and I remember driving her to court, to the grand jury. We made an arrest. And I drove her to court, the court appearances. And I pick her up in my 1970 Dodge Dart in my uniform. I wasn't supposed to drive a car. I definitely wasn't supposed to pick up complainants and take them to court. But I did that. And that's the younger Joe Fox. I don't know where that came from at 26 years old. But
mm,
I realize now it's like my very deep love of and connection to the line of duty families. The fact that at my retirement party, there was a huge section of them there. I'll never forget it. But it comes from that the way I think handle the pain of the extreme pain of losing a cop is service, and that's being in touch with that family. And for me, the wake and the viewing and the funeral, that's just a foundation.
mhm,
It's what happens later. It's the birthdays. It's 5 years later when everybody's not knocking on the door. It's the parole
mm,
hearings. Like there's so many of them. God bless the Ryman family. Harry
mm,
Ryman was killed in 1979. And here the three guys that did this are up in prison and for about 5 years of their life, and they're still living with these parole hearings that come up every couple of years, and the guys deny it, and what that they go through. So for me, dealing with that pain is trying to be there with these families as much as I can. And that's kind of, now how do we get there? Maybe we'll get further into that. Because
yeah,
if we're going to do anybody any service in this podcast, I think it's probably important to talk about some steps on how to do that. I mean, like for example, steps, and I'll digress back and then I'll let you come back to
mhm, mhm,
facility. Like when you mentioned the negativity we see, I put out a few different TikTok videos and things where I talk about those people who say, I had to get off Facebook. I just couldn't stand it, just too negative. They're not utilizing a very, very important tool that they have in their body. And it probably weighs an ounce. It's this finger here. And it works like this: swipe, swipe, swipe. You see a guy in a hospital bed with a bandage on his foot. You don't want to read about his story right now. Swipe, swipe. You see, a picture of an elected official, left, right, middle, and you don't want to get into politics because you've had enough. Swipe, swipe. You don't have to read everything that's in front of you.
That's
Look for
right.
the stuff. Look for the lollipops and rainbows.
Yeah, that's right. Great advice. No, that's fantastic. I would like to dive more deeply in while we're on this. I do want to make mention of it. There's a few comments that came in, and one of them, I know Carlos has been with us for a number of these conversations. So Carlos mentions, Chief, thank you for your dedicated service and sacrifices over your years of law enforcement service. From a 13-year law enforcement officer, I salute you. So just wanted to bring that up. Thought you would
Thank you,
like to know
Carlos.
there's a fellow law enforcement officer on here, and thank you, Carlos. And then Hind asks another one of our guests. She asks a few good questions. One, before we dive more deeply, I'd like to stay on the social media piece because I think it can be a value before we go too heavy. And she says, how do you think being visible on social media has propelled your mission forward?
Wow, that's a great question. And I wish, what's her name?
Hind, Hind.
Hind, Officer Hind, Miss Hind, Hind. I don't know which is which.
She is not law enforcement. Carlos was the gentleman.
Well, well, whatever it is, just to address her properly. That's a great, it's one of the things I share with people who are so immersed in their careers and make that break. And I suggest that they should consider social media because it opens your world up if done correctly. And for me, to answer your question, I mean, it's back to the fact that we're sitting here now. It's because of things I post that Adam thought to reach out to me. One of the most moving, I guess, interviews I've done was recently with a man named Evan from LinkedIn, who reached me on LinkedIn, and he saw a picture I posted of my nephew Michael's prayer card, who died on September 11th. He was a firefighter, and that led to him doing a professional interview. That's on his page. He's going to give me video segments. It was an emotional experience. It was about the photo, about 9/11, about my feelings, about what happened then. It all came from here. Sometimes people say to me, "So what are you doing these days?" And I'll say, "Check my page." Is what I'm doing. I share. And back to the question, um, these places I go, they all come from people seeing me here. Going down to New Hope, which means the world to me. I'm going to have 50 police officers from down that part of the world in a room with me for a day with Chief Dollinger, who's a real, forward-thinking, innovative, caring leader. That's all. He and I met through the things I share out here. So, I guess, listen, when I was a kid, my father took me fishing at the Canarsie Pier. And I was about 7 years old, and it seemed like we'd never catch a fish. And, you're that age, you put a line in, you expect a fish to be on it. You don't realize what fishing is. Fishing's about not catching fish. And this old man
Mm.
gave me a little mackerel fish. It was dead. It was this big. He said, "You want it?" I said, "Yeah." And I took it home, and I asked my mother if I could show the neighbors. She gave me a napkin. She says, "Put it in something," because the insides were starting to come out. And I went door to door. "Hi, Mrs. Hannigan. I got this fish. I didn't catch it, but my man gave it to us. Hi, Mrs. Mulligan. Hi, Mr. McKinney. Hi, Mrs. Gannon." Hi. And I went door to door, sharing my fish. I think that was the beginning of me wanting to share what I'm excited about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Chief, going back to what you mentioned about some of the steps, I do want to unpack that because I think we all face traumatic experiences and they're defined differently, right? Not everyone on here has been witness to death in real time. Not everyone on here has gone through chronic illness or faced cancer, but sometimes people just go through life challenges, series after series after series, where they get in a depressive state, and although it might not be defined as trauma, it still brings about a negativity internally that disallows them from progressing. So, what have you seen as useful? Because you mentioned some steps. I'd be curious if there's like a series of things that you learned while in law enforcement or you've now studied after that can help people either going through defined trauma or just plain old adversity of life.
Well, I'll start with the real simple. I do TikTok videos. I'm on a 4-day cycle schedule. And one I did a few weeks ago was the story of a guy walking by and sees a dog crying and crying and crying in the same spot in the front lawn. And he sees the owner one day and says, "Your dog is crying and crying every day, crying and crying. Just stand there." And the guy says, "Yeah, his foot is on a nail." And it's bothers him enough that he cries about it, but not enough that he gets off the nail. So I guess
Mm,
the first thing is we have to we have to recognize that we matter. And if we're not feeling right, like that's the beginning. Because if we don't accept people doing bad things to us, and we should not, well, if we're not feeling right, right there, that tells us we have to do something differently. And I say this mindful that for some people, like for me, a bad day today was when I was on the Peloton. I live on a beach and they're doing work on the sand and they're sifting through sand and taking out rocks and things. They're moving it from one place to the other. And it's noisy. And for me, that was a bad moment of my day. For other people, a bad moment is when they wake up and they think of the dread and the pain and then they can't get out of bed. So I recognize that we're talking about a huge spectrum here. And I really got to see this, especially on TikTok. When I put these videos out, I always say, if anybody, and by the way, if anybody wants to message me privately, this is one of the things I do when I'm not posting. I communicate with people who need help. It's not part of a practice or anything. It's just something I'm lucky to be able to do. But I get these messages from people on TikTok, like the one I put out about not tolerating harmful relationships. So I said, "Are you okay?" And it was a female, and she said, "I think I'm okay now. He moved out in March, and he hasn't hit me since April." And I put this thing out in June. Now, so then I can't tell you how many times I would say, because I'd be careful how I say this. I'd say, "I don't mean to be forward, but do you have any experience with therapy?" And I can't tell you people who tell me that they're the people who like can't get out of bed. No, I've never thought of therapy. So if something's not right, you deserve help.
Mm.
Seeking help of others is not a weakness, it's a sign of strength.
Yes.
There's not a reason that I mentioned me going to being in therapy about 4 times already in 15 minutes. It's a message. It's a message to everybody. Look at this happy life. Look at this. I mean, this is what you see here, what you see in those posts. That's me all day. I
Mm.
mean, sometimes when I walk in a boardwalk, it's hard to talk to people on the phone because I run into people. I talk to strangers. But but we deserve that. We deserve that helicopter over the beach. And if we can't get there in a day to that person who has a hard time getting out of bed, we deserve help. We
Mm.
deserve the help of another. And
Yeah.
whether that's therapy, I mean, it's so much easier now to find a therapist. You used to have to look in a book. Now you just go to BetterHelp, goodtherapy.com. That's
Mm-hmm.
everybody in there are qualified people with good credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody needs help finding help, I will help them with that.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear these people with these deep pains as a life coach, that's beyond what I can do, but I can listen. I can suggest resources. So it's about the first step is, speaking of one of the topic is mindfulness. If something's not right, we owe it to ourselves to recognize it.
Yes.
If we find ourselves getting really, really angry because it's raining out, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to check what that is. I mean,
Yes.
that's the end of the people that have difficulty getting out of bed. Those who like will say, if you ask them, "Hey, how are you? Are you happy?" And they say, "Yeah, I am." Well, we have to work on when we're not. Like when I
Mm.
find myself saying, "What are they doing on this beach? There's noise, there's terrible. Who cares about a few rocks in the sand? They're spending millions of dollars going through rocks. Just let me step on sand. I don't care what's underneath it." I have to catch myself.
Yes.
I have to say that there's a reason to doing this.
Yeah.
And the reason may not be convenient with me wanting to listen to a podcast while I'm on a Peloton bike right now, but it's a calibration, like a
Mm.
recalibration.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is to not allow being angry with the noise in front of the beach, with the rocks going through the sifter, and letting that affect my day, letting that
Mm-hmm.
affect this interview, letting that affect the Joe Fox I bring to others today.
Yeah. Yeah, I subscribe to that very ideology too, Chief. I think, and I'm so glad you brought it up. I think that sometimes people misperceive. I run this program called Mindful Journey. And they're like, "Oh, are you just a Zen master? You don't have bad days?" And I'm like, "No, I'm human. I face difficulty as well and challenges. And I always want to be raw and real with people, so not to paint a picture that everything is perfect because nothing is. But I have." Kind of like what you're saying, I want to bring this to the audience because I think it's an important point for us to take home. I've begun to look at situations as moments as opposed to this totality of a day or a week, a month, because too many times we allow series of things to stack to create this, innate frustration, depression, etc. It's like if I have a bad moment, just a moment. It doesn't have to translate to a bad day. So if we can separate that which we're going through so it's not a defining thing, I
That's
believe, at least for me, it's been helpful to get out of that thing. So I just kind of really wanted to add on to your response there because the Peloton thing resonates with me, although I'm not a Peloton guy. There have been times where I'm going to the gym and there's traffic and I can't get there, or it's longer and it causes frustration. It's like, this is just a temporary inconvenience. This is not a permanent fixation. So, is there something that you do that helps you be able to just look at things as moments? Do you journal? Do you meditate?
Uh,
Is there a habit that you rely on that allows you to get to that headspace?
well, I think what both of us described, it's there's actually a lot of steps that we can take, short of going to a therapist. You know, like what you just mentioned. Like, for example, is my car key. How many times do we put our key down someplace, right? As we're coming home, we're rushing, we're looking to get ready, and then this happens. Our key falls on the floor. And we're holding packages and we say, son of a, and we get mad. I don't do that much anymore. I used to do it a lot.
Yeah.
I love when I do that because I catch myself and I say, what you just said about it's a moment. And I say to myself, this is not a person. This is a key. I mean, depending on who you ask, this is an inanimate object. There's
Yeah.
theory that everything has some type of life to it, but this is a key. This does not fall on purpose. This is not directed to me, and that's the
Mm,
what's directed to me and what's not. My other favorite is, and this is my all-time favorite. You're at a light, you're driving. If the light's red, there's a car in front of you. The light turns green, the car doesn't move, so you get really, really angry, right? Even with the windows up, hopefully you're yelling, you're cursing, maybe you're honking. And what I did, and probably I don't do that anymore.
yeah.
And the reason is I completely. It's like when someone stops an addiction. You know, once it's over, it's over. And I what I did was I started when I would find myself like that. I would pull up as we went along our journey after the guy finally went, and I go next to them in a surreptitious way, not confrontational, and I'd look over at them, and what would I see? A human being, someone who how we began this conversation, sharing this journey with me.
Mm,
They didn't intend to mess with my day because they were too slow pulling out the light. They're not here for that. And once
yeah.
I do, I actually when I used to do this, I would feel foolish that I was
Yeah.
upset.
Yeah.
And it's a practice that you'll if anybody happens to see me on a road, just as a test, try to get in front of me, stop at a red light, and then go nowhere when it turns green. Put it in park. And I guarantee you, 2 hours will go by and you won't hear a word from me. And the point is, when we employ these skills, the other one is to recognize that, I mean, there's a really great book. It's an interpretation from Spanish. So it's a little tricky to get its full grasp, but it's called The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz.
Mhm.
And so it's a short book, four agreements, and one is never take things personally. And that sounds like such a lollipops and rainbow, you know, um, fairies and feathers, concept. It never take things personally. That sounds like a cliche, but the way to make that not a cliche is to recognize that anytime somebody disrespects you, speaks bad about you, it's never about you. It's only
Mhm.
about you to the extent that you allow it to be about you.
Mhm.
Because if you look at the people who gossip about you, envy is admiration corrupted.
Mm, love
Envy
that.
is because people are only envious of things that most people would want. And you know, and I'm sure there's some people out there that are in a really negative state saying, yeah, right, give me a break. This can't be real, meaning me. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and I feel for people who may say that because they're probably not on the right side of happiness and they don't know how to get there. And
Mhm.
we'll get there because the bottom line to, to close this one segment, at least from what I'm saying, if we're not feeling right too much, that's not how we're supposed to live. And
That's
that's
right.
a mindfulness lesson. Start with that. When you're not
Mhm.
feeling right, when you're having more bad days than good, do something. Do
Mhm.
something. Seek the help of a professional, a friend. Change the channel.
Mhm.
Literally on the TV, swipe what you're looking at in your phone and change the channel in your life. Think about who you associate with, what you do. Take the steps and do the work.
Mhm. Mhm. It sounds like post law enforcement career, you've done so much work on yourself, and I commend you and admire that. Not just the seeking of therapy, but engaging on social media, put these positive messages out. My question for you, Joe, for those particularly listening in who might not be in a retirement phase, if you will, of life from whatever their career may have been, were you able to deploy these same practices while you were in midst of leading thousands of officers dealing in high pressure, high stress moments? Or is it something that you feel that as you've been able to disconnect from that, it's been easier to do?
That's a great question, Adam. And it's actually, sometimes I'll tell a friend, I'll say, um, you know, you're 15 years younger than me. I was not here 15 years ago, but I was on my way. I was on my way. Like I made sure, as a borough commander, bureau chief, like when I'll give you a perfect example. As a borough commander, I worked out an average of 1 to 3 or 4 times a week. Because the schedule was varied but yet I had flexibility.
Mm.
As a bureau chief, I knew I had much less flexibility. So I adapted. And instead of working out when it was convenient, when I did a later tour, I worked out every day, starting my day at 7:30 in the morning, going to the gym before work. Half hour, 40 minutes, but I did that. So I always had an eye on taking care of me while I was taking care of others. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't mean going to Aruba for December. And I used to teach it to my COs. It became known as item 2 because it was the second item on an agenda. And it was right around November. And I told them, we're going to get consumed in the holidays. You're gonna be thinking you have to go to every single event. You're gonna tell, in most cases, it was guys telling their wives, don't worry, honey, I'll be there for the kids Christmas week when they're off from school. We'll do a lot Christmas week. And now you're working 12 hours a day, every day until then. Is that distracting, that noise?
No, I don't even hear
Okay,
it.
good. They're back. They heard me.
Okay.
They're breaking rocks again. Let me can I pause and just close the
Sure.
windows?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
one
Certainly.
second.
Yep. Yep.
All right. I'm glad it's not interfering on your end. It's a little better now on my end. They must have
Okay.
heard. They must have heard me
Yeah.
talking about, oh, it's just a few rocks being broken. So yeah, let's go test them. Which means there's
Yeah,
probably somebody waiting for me at a red light when it turns green
that's right. I was just
at
gonna say
some
that
point today.
they're like, let's see if he's gonna put these practices into application.
So I would take these moments, and it just was something that I knew that I had to take care of myself, or I couldn't take care of others. And
Yes.
another thing that helped me in 2013, me and a team of 4, total of 5, including me, as a 3-star chief, started doing 2-day monthly 7 Habits of Highly Effective People seminars. And we had 25 to 30 people in a room, and we did it for 5 years, every month. And then some we were invited in other places. So by teaching these principles, I got to practice them,
Yes.
because you retain your highest retention level are the things you teach to others. So if you want to be good at something, find a lot of people to teach it to, and you'll be
Yeah.
real good at it. And those are all in 7 habits. Those are all life skills.
Mhm.
Think with the end in mind, find the win-win. Um, and my favorite was sharpening the saw, taking care of self-care. And back to the COs. So what I would tell them is Christmas week comes, that whole week is for us, right? It's for the family. And some crisis happens on a Monday, that day's gone. Wednesday, the NYPD calls a CompStat meeting. So now not only is Wednesday gone, but Tuesday's gone because you got to prepare. And then Friday, I call a meeting, so there's your week. So I would say a little here and a little there. If you know you're going to come home at 11 o'clock, don't go in at 10 in the morning. Go in at 1. Play wiffle ball with your son on his lunch hour from school, like I used to do with my son Joseph. Do these little things. Get a little here and a little there. Make it, 7 habits. reap a practice, it becomes a habit. Once you start doing something, it becomes a habit. And the reason that I make sure I take care of myself every single day, the reason that my time on that bike happened before this podcast, is because I've learned now I'm able to put a little more time away for myself.
Hmm.
Same time, I'm probably doing more too. So it's all about finding that balance. But I had, you can do it. You can do it as an executive. You can find a few
Hmm.
minutes here and there.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that message to us because I think too many times, and I've heard it from friends and family alike, where they're like, I don't have enough time. I've got work, I've got the kids, I've got this, and it's like we always have a little bit of time, right? It's just about being intentional on carving out that time and putting ourselves first. I'm happy you also brought that up because sometimes there's this message in our world that we should be unselfish, that others are before us. But I believe I'm by nature a rather unselfish person. But when it comes to me taking care of me versus somebody needing something from me, if I've not taken care of me today by either exercising, etc., running, it's therapeutic for me. I'm not going to choose something else over that unless it's some sort of crisis moment, etc. But I'm grateful to you, Joe, for bringing that message to us. That essentially what I'm pulling from you is that self care isn't selfish; it's essential.
Yeah. I'll give you one anecdote of how, if you really value this and you practice it, you will practice it. I was in 2015 posthumously promoted to detective first grade. Brian Moore was killed in the line of duty in a 105 precinct. And he was shot and he hung on for about a day or so. So when he was pronounced, it wasn't like it didn't happen immediately. So there was time to, like, I got a phone call first before it was an immediate. And I was just in the process of running a meeting in my office. And I shared the news with the 8 or 10 people there. And I said, I'm going to go tell the staff, because in the transit bureau, we had a large staff. And I thought that should come from me. Let me go tell, they're all police officers. Let me go give them the news. And I'm the last person out of the office. And as I'm walking through my door, something came over me. It wasn't even conscious. And I closed the door and went inside. And I sat in my chair and I shed some tears. And I looked around at the pictures. I looked at a picture of Dylan Stewart, who was one of my 7 cops who died in the line of duty in 2004, 2005. And thought of my son, who was in the academy. And actually, Angela, who worked with me, knocked on the door. Chief, you okay? And she didn't know what was going on, but she knew I rarely closed my door. And I was good now. 10 minutes, maybe 15. And I got up and I went station to station. And everybody, hey, Chief, how are you? I said, I got some bad news. And I delivered that news. I'm convinced that I was better equipped to deliver that news to each of those 50, 55 people in a more compassionate, caring, loving way than I would have been if I didn't take the 10 or 15 minutes for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize when it was happening, Adam. It's just the way I look back, I thought, wow, I'm practicing what I'm teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, it can be 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be 45 minutes on a Peloton and then a 4-mile walk, retired life. It could be 40 minutes in a nail salon. It could be an hour every 2 weeks with a therapist. That counts.
Yes.
Therapy counts. Manicures count. Meditation counts. Exercise counts. There's a video I put out on TikTok the other day that everybody's, I got to learn how to meditate. Do something that takes your mind off the rocks, off the grind, off the stress, off your phone, the stuff you don't want to see. Do that.
Yes.
And that's meditation. And you will
Yes.
feel better for it. And that could be fishing without catching fish.
Yes.
Golfing, a terrible game, getting going for a walk, taking a break. It's something that if we practice it every day, we're better able to heal ourselves.
Definitely. Great insights. Good stuff. Going back to your chief days, and I'm personally intrigued by this, and I trust many of the listeners, even if not in a law enforcement space, would be as well. Because from the outside, I've never operated in law enforcement. I have a deep appreciation for those who do. I have many friends in law enforcement, And it's not lost on me that in that world, it's a high pressure, high stress type of environment. It is literally life and death in many occurrences. But even in the, those non-occurrences where you're out actually getting to interact with the public and it's friendly type of environment, you're still scrutinized in such a way, especially today with social media, where everyone has an opinion. My question for you is, how, when you were operating in that chief role as a leader, did you help build a culture within where other leaders listening in today could translate that into their maybe corporate space, to ensure that your frontline folks who are out, servicing the community in a thankless job in many occurrences still felt compelled to wake up with energy, with enthusiasm and passion. Is there anything specific? I know it's a long winded question, but anything specific you relied on as a leader to drive culture, to kind of help people continue to rally around what they love about law enforcement and not dwell on the negative?
That's a great question. So Zig Ziglar, I think he was a writer or something, and one of his
Yes, speaking,
favorite
yeah.
quote of his is people say motivation doesn't last, neither does bathing. That's why people do it daily. So if you think as a leader that you can go around and make a speech and tell everybody that you appreciate them and we believe in you and rah rah, and do that once a year, you're not supporting people. It has to be just like exercise has to happen daily, just like relationships with the people we love, we have to work at daily. We have to see it incumbent on us to build up the people who work for us and with us. And I was at a conference once with all the NYPD executives, something in Colombia, and they had a flip chart going, and the facilitator asked, "What's the mission?" And a lot of people said public safety, public safety. I mean, it's a no-brainer, policing, public safety. So I
Mhm,
raised my hand and said, isn't public safety the primary mission in total and of all the cops who we lead? But isn't our primary mission supporting them? And the guy said, good point, and moved on without really explaining. But I took it. I went to a break and I did a voice note to my team, and they put together a great package for me. It's something I teach now. And the idea is doing an audit to that executive that wants to build a team. Look back 7 days. Just look at your calendar. And this is all right into mindfulness.
mhm,
What did you do in the last 7 days that supports the people who carry out the mission?
yes.
Visit a hospital? Did you visit a command? Did you call someone who's sick? Did you call someone on their birthday? All of those in and of themselves sound like nothing. But when they're consistently done, going to a
Yes.
gym and working out for 2 hours is nothing. But when you do it every day, you're in great shape,
Mhm,
mind and body. So look at the calendar. And here's even better. Look at my calendar ahead of time. And if there's not enough people stuff, then we're not supporting the people who support the mission. But
mhm,
and here's the thing, if any one of us just accepts that as what our mission is, they don't need anyone to teach them how to do it because
mhm,
we are all born to do this. Why
mhm,
don't some leaders do it? Because they're so worried about what's coming at them.
mhm.
It's like, I don't have time to get gas. I'm too busy driving. I don't
Yeah,
have time to stop and
yeah,
visit commands. I got this meeting coming up into it. Well, you got to build the people up because they will build.
yes,
And that's basically in essence, it's constant building people up. And
yeah,
and my favorite, I guess, mindfulness mission message, and it was when 4 police officers in Dallas were assassinated during a demonstration. Police officers who were protecting the demonstrators were assassinated by somebody. And Brent Thompson was one of them. I became friends with his family. Um, and uh, and I just went command to command. And it was when the vilification of police officers was beginning in high gear. We saw that on steroids in 2020, but this was 2016, 2017 when it was getting pretty bad. And I went command to command, and I said, people can take their support from you, they can take their encouragement, they can vilify you, they can write bad things about you, but no one can take why you do what you do away from you.
Yes.
You can take that. You hold that. And if you need to be reminded how important that is, why you signed on to do this, well, then go to your locker and find the last time you got a letter from somebody in the community who thanked you for the way you handled the car accident with my 18-year-old daughter, who was so upset she thought it was the worst thing in the world for her, because so far it was. Or
Mm,
go look at the last arrest you made where you got to return the property to a victim.
mm.
And none of the people who are criticizing you, and I don't want to get political here,
Yeah.
none of the people on any of the networks, I'm pointing to my TV, none of the
Yeah.
people on any of the on Twitter, they can't they can't give you that. That's why you
Yes.
came here.
Yes.
That's, what is that? That's mindfulness. It's
Yeah.
remembering why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So powerful. Why you do what you do. What a great kudos to you. Gosh, you make me want to have worked underneath your leadership, Joe. I think that we as people need to be consistently reminded, no matter our industry, of what is our purpose. You know, so many times, and I do a lot of work with different organizations as well, leadership training stuff, and I worked with a lawn care company I remember years ago, and it was their leadership team. A lot of their frontline team members think, "Oh, we just cut grass," you know, we're just cutting grass. And I'm like, we, as a leader, you have to help them see something beyond that. I know it can be grunt work and not glamorous, but you're not cutting grass, you're beautifying an area that a cancer patient might be coming home to, right? Like searching for, really searching to think about that end beneficiary of your work. And you were able to do that. So kudos to you and what you were doing for your team, because I trust it probably made an impact on them that has been long standing. I want to be cautious of our time, but I'd like uh, to your level of comfort, of course, Chief. I'd like to dive in a little bit to the 9/11 because it sounds like something very near and personal to you had arisen. And would you mind just walking the listeners here through what that time was like in the city as a cop who was operating in that time, and then to your, again, your level of comfort, sharing about the experience of losing your family member who's a firefighter, and then how you coped through that and continue to honor his legacy.
Well, thank you. Well, honoring his legacy was probably the easiest thing that ever came to me, because it was when I went there that night and I knew, I saw the devastation. I went there about 8 or 9 p.m. We were given a command to not go there if you weren't there already, and that killed me. So I just did whatever I could in the outer borough. I visited hospitals. My September article in the Rockaway Wave covers what that day was like, that part in the hospitals. But and then Chief Esposito, God rest his soul, had a meeting at 6 p.m. So I got to Manhattan. But on the way, when I got there and I toured the area and saw the devastation, I was the first in my family to know that I was not going to see Michael alive again. I just knew. Um, and hope is a funny thing. Some people need it. Some people need to put it down so they could deal with. I need to put it down and deal with what's in front of me. And something came to me that he would say repeatedly to me. He was 13 years younger than me. Uncle Joe, that's awesome. Uncle Joe, that's awesome. Uncle Joe, that's awesome. He was so proud of my career. He told me once that, he said, Uncle Joe, you can never retire. I said, why, Mike? He says, because when I'm in a bar and there's a bunch of cops there and they realize I'm your nephew, I don't pay all night. So what came to me that night on the pile, by the South Tower, I didn't know what tower he was in. Coincidentally, that's where he died. And that's where I was standing, right where West Street was. And I thought, what did he love? I was perplexed. What did he love so much about me? What? And it came to me, and I thought, I don't know, but I have to try to be that man. And that's become one of my main missions in life, is to be the man that Michael loved so much. And I share that. I share that at funeral homes. I share that especially like with teenage boys or young ladies that lose a parent. And I'm careful how I do. I feel out where they're at. And I say that that's the job your dad left you with, to be the
Mm,
person that he loves so dearly. So that's his legacy for me. But that day there was, there was it was a day where some of it is crystal clear for me, and I'm still running into people who will tell me things that I have no memory of. And I think the mind does that. Just like we began this conversation talking about how we have to allow ourselves to feel what we can and not more.
Mhm.
Like Jackie would say to me after I retired, she'd say, Joe, when you used to talk about a kid getting killed, you talked about it in the same tone as, and then I went to the bagel store to get juice. And now I'm feeling it. And now I can't read the details of many stories, but
Mhm.
we have to let ourselves get there. But so back then, I think that's what happened. You know, we just allow ourselves to feel what we can. So I was really in the first few days when our responsibilities as chief of Brooklyn South was they split the city, the area into 8 parts, 8 borough commanders in the NYPD. And I had as chief of Brooklyn South, the lower left corner, lower west side, Battery Park, Battery City, West Street. And and honestly, I never shared this with anybody, but I was like frustrated, almost angry. Like that's all you got for me,
Mhm.
to watch for looting and like that's it. So I
Mhm.
decided that I would just, I guess be the change you want to see. And I decided my mission was to just walk around that site and walk up and down the digging lines and just stop by each person with a pail in their hands and tell them what they're doing is so important. And then I started bringing families there. So remember when we began with the woman in Brooklyn who was raped, and when I realized that my default was service.
Mhm.
So on September 18th, 7 days later, I had a lunch for the 85 Brooklyn South families, Brooklyn South cops who lost family members. So there was about 300 people there, and they stayed well after the lunch. So I knew the event was important because these are people who, for the first time in 8 days, 7 days, are meeting other people who lost loved ones. So I stood up there when I spoke, and I remember Jimmy Woods, my community affairs lieutenant and dear friend, and his whole team was in the back. And I remember the look of like almost going into cardiac because they said, anybody here who needs to see that site, we will get you there. This was 7 days later, and I'm announcing that if you want to go there, we'll take you there. And this was
Mhm.
like, remember, this is 2 months before they built that platform. And we did it. I used to call it the Underground Railroad. And we
Wow.
on September 11th, and we bring families there who needed to be there, families who lost people. And sometimes I'd go with them. And then I had this little room in the financial center. It was the second or third floor. You'd go up the escalator and you go into this room. It was all, sharp, powder, ash everywhere and broken things and no windows. I used to call it the penthouse because I would bring people there who were hurting and they were able to be a little bit away, but yet they could see everything and they'd cry. So when I would walk up and down these digging lines, I would point and say, I brought families there. And when they look out and see what you're doing, they come to tears with gratitude with what you're.
Wow.
And I guess it's exactly, about remembering why we do what we do. And that's what I tried to do then. And that was it. I found
That's
I felt like that was it. My job was to support people. And I'm communicating with someone now who said that I don't know if you remember this, and she described it. And I took her to the roof of that firehouse that was right in the southeast. I forget the house.
Mhm.
And and I took her and I said, yeah, I remember it because I would it was almost like a virus looking to attach to something. If I saw someone in pain, I'd walk over
Yeah.
and say, you lose somebody. So that became a lot of my mission then. And the cops, I would open up when I would go around to the command speaking with the cops. I would say, anybody here lose anybody? And I would have 150 cops in front of me because I go at 4 p.m. and the cops work from 8 in the morning till 4 and then 4 to 8. So I'd get them at the middle where I had every cop in a command before they had days off. And I'd say, anybody here lose anybody? And Adam, an
Mhm.
average of 4 hands would go up.
Wow.
Sometimes 6, sometimes 7, sometimes 2. An average of 4. And I'd ask
Wow.
them, and then I tell them about my nephew. And the perfect segue to come from that sadness was telling a story about him in the bar, saying I can
Yeah.
never retire. And everybody would laugh. And I'd say, for anybody here who was ever nice to my nephew, thank you. And then I would continue to tell them what they're doing is so important.
Yeah.
And so I guess like that rape victim in 1982, and I dealt with that pain by driving her to court. And it's funny about that because I can't tell you why is that on my mind so many years ago. Because often I say, how did I lose touch with her? Because this Joe Fox would have been in touch with her to the extent that she would have allowed birthdays, you name it. This Joe Fox, but that
Right.
was the Joe Fox, and I
Yeah.
didn't. And I just whatever skills we build in life, we build them slowly. Just like my 2-year-old granddaughter Charlotte. She's all impressed with herself because she can do what appears to be a run when we were walking around Disney last week. And back to gratitude and for a moment and the lawn and you mentioned people making our lawns look better,
Yeah.
like these guys with the rocks. Leah is my oldest grandchild. She's going to be 9 in November. So we go to Disney. I'm on a 2-year schedule with them.
Mhm.
And I am so happy that I got to share this with her the other day. She's at an age where she'd understand it. We were down there. And I pointed out to the grass of the Grand Floridian. I told her that when she was 4 years old, we looked out at the grass and I saw these men working 99 degrees in Florida. And they were with their mowers. And I said, Leah, isn't it so nice that they make this grass look so pretty for us? And she said, can we go thank them? 4 years old.
That's
I said,
awesome.
of course. Now, a parent would have said, no, they're working. We can't. We got to go here. And I said, of course. And we
Yeah.
walked out. They had the machines going. They're looking at me. And I went like this, and they turned the machines off. I said, she just wants to say thank you. And she said, thank you for making the grass look pretty. But I got to share that with. So back to mindfulness and telling people why they do what they do is important. She'll get hit with that memory for her
Yeah.
whole life because it's
Yeah.
a message of gratitude that I'm not teaching to her. She had it when she was 4 years old. My job is to nurture an environment where it comes out more.
Yeah. That's awesome stuff. Joe, quick question off, and I want to elaborate on a lot of what you shared. I got thing that my AirPod died. Can you hear me okay still? Or
Fine.
okay. I'm gonna take these off and see if I can get back. How about can you still hear me?
Good, but good enough. I can tell you're saying.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
That's perfect. That's just like the AirPods.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. And apologies on that delay. Back to your story. First of all, just thank you so much for your vulnerability. Thank you for being open. It's not lost on me that every time you share that story is probably somewhat therapeutic for you in many regards. So deeply grateful for you, Chief, for sharing. Did you know right away that Michael had passed? Were you already on scene? And what was that experience like when the news first hit you? How did you cope through that in those initial moments?
Well, so that morning, his firehouse was in Brooklyn, Hancock Street. And my sister, I'm getting messages from my sister. This is, cell phones didn't work that well. And I'm getting messages from her. Um, she's worried about him. And frankly, I just said nervous mother. Michael's not there. And there was a point where I actually thought, you are there, stop and call your mother, you know? And because he's off saving the world, I thought, if he was there. And then when I went to Long Island College Hospital at about 1, 2 p.m., because they sent me to the pier to help with evacuations in Sunset Park. And again, I was angry. Like, this is all they got. There's got to be more. And Anita Ryan, who was with me and driving me, said, Chief, there's a hospital there. Maybe there's some people we could see. I mean, there were. There was cops, 2 cops from the 2-5 precinct in Harlem carrying half their uniform in bags, eyes all red and face covered in soot. Firefighters and I did a cop who was on the radio with Jimmy Leahy when the building went down. Jimmy was one of the 23 cops, this cop named Victor. And I was in purpose then. I was in my purpose. And then there was a cop they told me about that he lost his whole company, a firefighter, lost his whole company, and he was in a gurney out in the outer area. And I went over to him and I started to say whatever I would say, and he kind of interrupted me. And in a stoic, but non-combative way, but to the point, He said, with all due respect, Chief, there's other people who can use your help. He says, and I just left. And I walked away. And in a self-serving moment, after I walked about 20 feet, I came back to him because I knew he'd lost his company. I said, where was your house? And all I heard was the word Brooklyn. And I walked out of there. I walked in control and command in my full uniform to help others. And I walked out of there frightened, scared, worried, heart racing, mind spinning. I went to the truck and I asked Mike Collins, he was my partner as a rookie cop. And now he's my partner in Brooklyn South. He was a one-star chief. I said, Mike, I know you have a lot of contacts in FD. I'm worried about my nephew. And then a couple hours went by. I wound up down at that meeting and I got this phone call, a beep from my sister again. So now I'm worried. So I went to this little security office in the ground floor of headquarters and called my sister. And I don't remember crying, but as she told me that Michael is definitely there and he hasn't been heard from, everybody started handing me tissues. And I think back that they couldn't hear what she was saying, so I must have been crying. And I rushed home. I repeatedly called Eileen, my ex-wife, and on the phone over and over and over again. I felt terrible because she was in a mass with my son and my daughter praying to Saint Michael, you know, for the lost, and just picked up her phone. I assumed she knew. So I went and got her, and then I went to my mom's house and got her, and then we went to my sister's house, and then we went to the site. So people in the family still had hope. People hoped he showed up disoriented in some hospital in New Jersey. I know. When I got there that night about 10 p.m., I just know. And that was when I had that moment that I wanted to live to be the man he was. And I guess I tried my best for that. And I think through the ideas that came, I had this concept, Adam, that all of us are doing all we can, but all of us on our best day are doing 60% of what's needed.
Mm.
And I remember it was hard to articulate. And I remember almost arguing with Jimmy Woods. He was like, I did very little without doing it with him. And he said, I don't understand, Chief. You're doing everything you can. But I said, no, Jimmy, you don't understand. I know I'm doing everything. You are. Everybody is. But it's 60% of what's needed. There's such a hole. There's more needed. And I said, for example, Jimmy, out of frustration, I picked up this folded paper in my pocket. And it was the names of the 85 Brooklyn South cops with their phone numbers, who I was calling, who lost people. And I said, for example, Jimmy, these names, I'm calling people. I said, and some of them, they're so touched and there's got to be more I can do than just calling them. And he said, Chief, how about we do like a lunch with them and their families? And I said, Jimmy, you got us to 65%. And we both got all excited and we paced back and forth and we had, it was in a church in Brooklyn. I think it was Our Lady of Guadalupe. We had Danny Rodriguez, the singing cop, who's huge now and a great man, and he sang, and it was a girls' choir from Bishop Kearney, a local school, and imam, a priest, and I did my words and what I said about time and the mind and what we block out. For months, I thought that was like 2 months later, a month later, and then I found my paper calendar, and it was September 18th at lunch, so it was 7 days later. Wow. So it was all about every moment finding purpose, and it was like, if you remember back then, there was just certain things you didn't do. Like you didn't have regular meetings because the world, in a way, in our part of the world, could have been coming to an end. And then one day I woke up, I called the office and said, have the COs come in. And we had our first COs meeting. And someplace I have my last agenda, the September 1st meeting, which is all about park walk and talk and meeting the community and calling the elected officials who lost and congratulating for a good fight because of local races and police stuff. And a new agenda: visit firehouses, find people in your commands who have lost people, let me know when the services are, we'll all attend, offer transportation to the firehouses. And it was all September 11th stuff. but I knew that was the time to do a meeting.
Yeah. That would be a cool if you still have those agendas, a visual post
So I
to
do.
yeah, with
We're in
people.
that closet in a box someplace.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. There's so much, Joe, that I want to continue to unpack with you. You've been an amazing guest, but for time purposes, we're gonna have to do part two at some point if you don't mind. I would
I'm
like to
fine.
ask one more question though, because I've asked this of every guest. As I told you, these are left unscripted, but there is one question asked of really three, but we kind of uncovered a lot of them. But one in particular that try to bring to every guest to learn from, coping mechanisms and just to, as I mentioned on the front end of this, normalize this shared experience of life. I want to tee it up before asking to give context to the listeners and to you as to the intention of it. We live in this time where, as I mentioned, when we talk about social media, we compare ourselves to everyone else. And as the old adage of comparison is the thief of joy, I believe that to be so true. But we still constantly look and assume that other people are more talented, more skilled. Why can't we speak like them? Why can't we look like them? Why don't we have the perfect spouse? And I've been wanting to get people not only this message of, hey, we've all got stuff, even some of the most prominent people that our society may look to, who's making billions a year, if that's what society points to as success, and everyday folks who maybe are unemployed. Everyone's got stuff. So that's kind of the intention of the question. The question, very simply, you may have already answered it, but what's the most challenging thing that you've gone through in your life, and what do you recall having done to get through it?
Well, it's actually, there's PTSD, which is from one event, and there's complex PTSD, which is thing after thing after thing. And I guess the most challenging thing I've gone through in my life is those 37 years. And I didn't know it when it was happening. I had 7 cops die in the line of duty under my command in 6 years. And I didn't look at that number until only a few years ago, because there was something in my mind that probably wasn't prepared to realize just how extreme that was. And then it doesn't matter whether they're under your command. Yeah, you're feeling it everywhere. There was a boy, the Orthodox boy, and I'll never forget his name, but I'm just not going to mention it here because I'm in touch with his family, and they're not very public about it, as to the extent that they're not. But it was actually on my 30th anniversary of coming on the job, and he was abducted in Brooklyn, in Borough Park, and found about 2 days later, and he had been killed by his abductor. He was only about 8 years old, I believe. So that, like, I was responsible for the search, and I kept looking at, I think it was my phone, because he was missing July 11th. So that it really heated up July 12th when he didn't come home that night. So we were all over the place. I mean, we just kept bringing the layers on. I mean, there was cops everywhere. It was everybody in the world. People wanted to be there. And I just kept looking at my phone. And it said July 12th, 9 p.m. July 12th, 10 p.m. And I kept thinking, because at that point we knew it was probably not going to be a good outcome. There was video of him getting in a car with somebody. And I said, is it going to be in my 30-year anniversary that we find him? And it was about 3 a.m, July 13th. And this is all of this combined, the line of duty deaths, September 11th. I'm very fortunate, because to whatever extreme you may see in my desire to serve, it comes from a corresponding level of pain. And that's the eureka moment I figured out with Jackie 5 years ago, that's my go-to thing. So it's like this concept I live by, like, we can't be sad enough to make those who are suffering in the world stop suffering. We have to be the light where we can.
That's awesome.
And if we dim that light because we're stuck watching sadness on TV or on our phone, there's a video that I took the other day at Ground Zero that I'm going to put out a few days before. And if if we find ourselves in September 11th being so overcome with sadness that we don't even have the strength to call a friend and tell them we love them, then we're not accomplishing anything.
Mhm.
We have to step away from our phones, looking at it all. We have to stop the TV, reading the names. I read my nephew's name. I won't this year. I'll be in Ireland with ceremonies. But I'm not, with all love and respect for those people who died that day and the families who are reading the name. If it brings you too much pain to watch that, that's a lot of pain. And we have to be good to ourselves. Because if we sit there overwhelmed on September 11th, then we're no good for the people around us. September 11th, September 12th, September 15th, and we just bring ourselves further down that spiral of living a life that we're not supposed to live.
Yes. Yes. What a beautiful message and a great conclusion to this conversation. I'm going to pause there because you really you tied a pretty bow on it and brought us home there, Chief. And um, so much great content and info spanning leadership and culture and healing and hope. And wow, I'm so grateful to you, so thankful. Appreciate you sharing things that are near and dear to your heart and opening up with us. Well, the thing that I'd like to kind of pull out from all that what you brought, the kind of theme, and I wrote this down here is purpose from pain, right? We all face pain, but it seems to me that you've taken what you went through in the past 37 years, both in your professional life and personal life, and used even the negative experiences to now be a light to others. So let that be a reminder for all of us to be a light to others. And you've inspired that in me. So thank you, Joe. Thanks for those listening who made it to this point. If you have any questions, we'll hang tight here. I know we've gone way longer than we typically do, but is Joe? Is there a way? I'm going to put in the chat function. I'll email out to everyone too. What is the best way for people to reach you if they're interested in engaging with you? Do you want them to go to your website or an email address?
The website's under construction, but any Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, I read and answer every single message, every single DM that
Okay.
comes. So whatever platform you're on, and I read every one of them.
Okay, and that's just Joe Fox. Like if they want to find you on Instagram, do you have a handle
Yeah,
on
Joe.Fox81.
Joe?
Joe.Fox81.
Okay, I'll put that in the chat for everyone.
But if
Well,
you put in Joe Fox, NYPD, and any of those, it usually pops up.
awesome. Very good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Joe. I'll connect with you offline. I'll send you a recording of this and looking forward to keeping our newfound friendship alive and well.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone.